So I've had a lot of people ask me to do more recordings or talk a little bit more about more practical stuff you can do to manage some of the negative symptoms or issues that come with these adaptations, schizoid adaptations, to be more specific. So I want to start doing a series, essentially, of videos in which I hone in on a specific topic, a set of advice and ideas that can maybe alleviate more unique schizoid issues and how to do so on a more pragmatic level. So, fuck it, that's what I'm doing. Today's topic is going to be masking and energy management. I guess that's the only way I can think of saying it, is how to manage one's energy in regards to the amount of energy drain or strain it puts on you to mask as much as schizoids tend to. Now, two things I want to clarify is one, schizoids are not the only people who mask. That should be apparent. Every human on Earth, at some point or another, at specific points in their life, masks. They present a semi-false persona in order to navigate specific situations, right? So one common one would be somebody that works, just work in general, right? You don't have to be neurodivergent to know that going to work requires you to sometimes fake stuff. Sometimes it requires you to fake a certain level of sincerity. Sometimes it requires you to fake a certain level of politeness that you don't think the person you're giving to might necessarily deserve. Sometimes it requires you to smile more or produce exaggerated forms of sincere emotion. Yes, that is something everyone has to do. It is an unfortunate thing, but it is a thing. Now, many times you might have heard people say, "Oh, I'm exhausted. I had to pretend like I wanted to be at work today." Or "I'm exhausted. I had to pretend that I liked this or that person." Or if, say, you didn't have a good boss, "Oh, I had to pretend that my boss was so smart or that he was funny because otherwise, things don't go as well as I'd like." There's a lot of pretending happening. The difference, though, is that in the case of the schizoid, it's all the time, nonstop, generally speaking, unless we're by ourselves. And that's usually for the Zoid that doesn't know yet that they're doing it. So they don't have another point of reference. So they kind of just keep doing it and keep doing it. And then there's the Zoids that know they're doing it. And still, due to the fact that they're trying to avoid specific situations so much that they keep doing it, even in situations where maybe they can get away with not doing so. The other point that I wanted to make was that not all schizoids mask all the time. There's some out there that I guess would be considered low functioning, in the sense that they don't, or they don't know how, or they're not very good at it. And so generally those type of schizoids wouldn't be covert ones. They would be overt in the sense that they would actively avoid situations or actively do things to not put themselves in any kind of position in which they would have to mask because they know they're not that great at it. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. So for them, that latter half, this might not be as useful a piece of advice because they aren't very good or don't know or don't have the tool set to do this well or capable of doing it for even extended periods of time to begin with. So for that, I'm probably going to have to do something else and discuss it with somebody else that isn't covert like myself more to learn how they manage certain things. But in the case of the covert, which is I'm sure many of you to various degrees, I think the key is managing that energy, managing the drain that masking requires. And there are a few ways to do this. Well, tip number one is kind of obvious. Realize you're doing it. For many people, you can go years without even noticing that you're doing this sort of thing. And it isn't until maybe your mid-20s or later that you realize, uh-oh, this doesn't feel right. I've been doing this essentially character for over a decade or longer, And this character isn't me, because every time I do it, I feel tired and shitty. Every time I go to a social event, every time I go to work, every time I engage in long periods of conversation with people, talking about things I'm not necessarily interested in any capacity. Afterward, even if during the time I've convinced myself oh, this is what people do, this is how we enjoy things, this is me laughing, this is me, um, you know, having these emotional expressions outwardly expressed. But after everything's said and done, the whole thing feels hollow, and you feel empty, and you feel tired, and you want to go home, and you want to be alone, or you want to sleep. Now, that's not generally how people feel when they engage in social interactions that they sincerely enjoy. That's what happens when people that don't sincerely enjoy those things feel after attempting them. It's very common. Common in that even people that aren't schizoid do it, and when they have to do it, they can only do it for a certain period of time before they feel tired or bored of it and exhausted. They can only be around that boss they don't like for a couple of hours before they go, oh my God, I'm sick of this. I can't pretend I'm enjoying this anymore. This is too difficult. Now, what's so difficult for the schizoid is that situations that would be considered really innocuous to most people are very draining to the schizoid. Imagine, if you will, you're working, so you're doing some kind of labor, which is, tiring in and of itself, whether physical or mental. And then you're supposed to take your lunch break or your, meal. Now, this isn't the case for a lot of people, but I've had jobs like this. You're supposed to rest during that period, right? It gives you a little recharge time so that you can get back to the grind of your job. But unfortunately, if, say, your lunch period is in a very public place or a cafeteria of some kind, or something in which people are like around and talking and interacting or attempting to interact with you, or there's a possibility that they'll try to for whatever reason. Maybe it's because whatever mask you had set up was an entertaining or charming one, and so they're running under the assumption that it's the real you, and so thus they want to attempt to communicate even further. Now, you're supposed to be resting at this time. But if this occurs, you are not resting. You are still actively under a certain level of stress. So maybe you can't even enjoy your meal. Maybe you won't get to be on your phone and zone out for a minute. You'll just be too busy trying to communicate again, and probably have to mask during that 30-minute to 1 hour period. For those of you that don't, necessarily work right now or have a job in which you have to interact with coworkers, many of you still have family. So when you're at home, you're under this kind of level of stress because your siblings or parents or other people in your life want to be interacting on a consistent basis when you're not interested in doing that form of interaction. Now, I'm not saying the schizoid doesn't enjoy consistent forms of interaction, because there could be some. I feel that the server is a good example of such a place, because I notice that people will spend significant amounts of time with each other communicating a variety of topics there. So there is a form of interaction that is tolerable, if not enjoyable. But most forms of interaction are usually not for the schizoid, at least conventional forms. They feel forced and not helpful to your stress levels. I think part of this is because the subject matters that are generally discussed or brought up during said interactions don't have anything to do with the way you perceive the world or the things you value. They generally have to do with how the world is perceived by most and what the world values most, consensus-wise. Which makes it really difficult for you to relate, and thus it's inevitable that you're going to be exhausted by the whole performance. So the question becomes, what do we do? What does the schizoid do to navigate this situation? Because it is essentially unavoidable, right? And for those that do avoid it actively, well, unfortunately, with that also comes other difficulties, such as a lack of work, maybe, a lack of interactions or a healthy amount, at least even for you, of interactions that could be good, things that might further you in your career, in your studies, in a variety of things. Things that could be useful but require a certain level of social dynamics, involvement, and that sort of deal. But like I said, that's probably a topic for a different video. For those that do choose to or have no choice, here is my advice. Because oftentimes I get told, what do I do? By many people, what do I do? How do I manage this? I feel tired all the time. It makes me angry. It makes me sad. I'm exhausted and drained. No amount of sleep ever recovers the drain and dread that comes with knowing that this same event, these same interactions are going to be occurring day in and day out, and that I'm going to have to present this insincere mask in almost every one of those situations. And it's not really a deception. It's not a lie. It's more of a survival. Because you're trying to do a few things when you mask. One, you're trying to avoid certain types of conflicts, because somebody that doesn't behave in a regular way will often come across certain types of conflicts. Some examples would be people interpreting your kind of aloof, indifferent nature as being, or presentation as being, someone that doesn't give a shit about their job, which might be true, but you're still going to do it. But for whatever reason, people really like you to give a shit about things, not just do them well. So there's that kind of masking, right? There's also the type of masking in which, say you have friends or people that you like to do activities with, mostly more for the activity than the people sometimes. But so because of that, you have to kind of display a certain amount of enjoyment in being around them as people, even if you are somewhat enjoying yourself or you are okay with it, especially the activity. It's like you have to convey it further, because if you don't, then it can be perceived as you being uninterested in them or devaluing them in some capacity, or thinking you're better than them, or there's a million ways that being quiet, aloof, and just sort of blasé about a lot of things can be interpreted as a negative quality, even hostile quality, which is really difficult for me to get my head around sometimes, but that is just how it is. Like, here's one example in which it's a little different and that I have to deal with, but it's not like it's a really big one. It's just a small example of a kind of a quirky thing that happens sometimes. Let's say my daughter, right? She's 2 years old. Say my daughter, I don't know, trips a little bit or falls, in some way. And obviously I can't catch her. She's not within my reach, right? So then she, hits her knee a little bit or something, or she tumbles over, and then she gets up again, right? So the issue here is I watched what happened, right? I saw her take a tumble, saw her get up, saw where she hit herself, how she hit herself, if in fact she even hit herself, made an assessment, and then maybe told her, are you okay? Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Oh, it's okay. But, some other people might want to react by going over and picking them up and going over and somehow consoling them for what, to me at the time, looked like something that didn't need consolation of any major capacity, right? Had she fallen and scraped her knee, and had she fallen and bumped her head, that is a completely different situation, right? But no, it was just a simple tumble and a recovery. I see it, I assess it, and I move forward. But oftentimes, my lack of reaction can be interpreted as, why aren't you reacting? She just fell, or something like that. And, I have to remember, I have to go, oh, okay, no, I paid attention. I just noticed she was fine. I have to clarify that, no, I know she's fine. I watched what happened. If she would not have been fine, I would have gotten up. But that's not what happened, so it's okay, right? This isn't so much a problem as much anymore, but it used to be kind of more of a problem, especially with my first kid, because it can be interpreted as you don't care, right? And that's not what it is in many cases. And so I'm just giving you kind of like a very basic example. God, I'm doing it again. I'm like completely off track. Fuck. Okay. Back to the actual tips. This is what you need to do. What needs to be done is, like I said, step one, realize you're doing it. Realize you're a person that masks all the time. Figure out why you're doing it, right? So being aware of the masking is a very important step. Tip two, now that you know you're masking, start questioning, why am I masking at these points in time? What is motivating me to do so? And are those motivations warranted? Is there any other way to handle this situation that wouldn't require me to be masking as such? Now, I know it's difficult, especially once you're transitioning out of just doing it like intuitively, the whole masking thing after a long time. So that's going to be one of the hardest things to kind of step over, is realizing, okay, taking hold of it, taking a more conscious hold of the whole thing. Once you're capable of doing this is what you need to do. You need to decide, is it time for me to mask or not? Many times it's not. Many times it's not really required. Many times you make assumptions that it's required. Or you do so at levels that are expending more energy than you really need to be expending. For example, if you are at lunch at work, right, and you don't want to talk to coworkers, you just say, oh, I just like to sit here quiet, I have a headache, or, you make some excuse, right? Usually after saying similar excuses for an extended period of time and different days, people get the hint and they'll stop. If they don't get the hint, you explain to them, I like to have my lunches alone, I prefer the quiet. Or you can put on some headphones and say, oh, I like to listen to music during my lunch. It recharges me, or something like that, right? And then you can listen to music or video or whatever it is you're doing. Usually wearing headphones is also a good way to stay people from communicating with you. And if it gets to a level to where they're being incessant, then at that point you're more than justified to say, hey, can you let me have my lunch? I like it quiet. Now, hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but if it needs to, it needs to. It's simple. You're not doing anything illegal. It's not a social faux pas to want to have a quiet lunch. If anything, they're intruding, and they need to stop. Having those moments in which you don't have to mask lets you, in fact, recharge yourself. Like anybody else might be feeling recharged by the social interactions they might partake in during that lunch break, right? That quiet time is your time. Take it. They don't have to understand why. It's yours to take. Another good way to manage masking related energy is by not overdoing it. Don't overdo it. So like I said, the first part of that was take the breaks you can get, right? The next part of this energy management is not overdoing it. You don't have to hug people. You don't have to outwardly express in energetic ways. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to make jokes if you don't want to make them. You don't have to laugh at other people's jokes as vehemently as you may think you do. A smirk, a small chuckle. Things like that can be far more suitable for the situation. And one of the benefits, especially if it's a new area, new place, that you're working at or going to, or in like school or college or whatever, if it's a new place, people don't know who you are yet. So if you do this low-level masking, which is a little easier, then it makes it far easier to kind of manage it as you go, because there will be this assumption that you're kind of a aloof person, a little bit eccentric, a calm, stoic individual, right? they won't suspect anything as far as like, oh, look, this guy's, different, or this person acts in a way that I could perceive as rude, You might get some of those people, but fuck those people. Those people are way, way, way too into themselves. But the average person is not going to give a shit. They're just going to go, oh, well, he has reactions. They're just not very strong. And that's okay. So that's one other way to sort of mitigate the amount of damage you take energy-wise in those types of situations or scenarios. Now, this part of avoiding masking energy drain is a little more difficult because of the anhedonian evolution, but it's still something I want to mention. Keeping yourself busy. Stay productive, or as the younger people than me like to say, the grind. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. Actively learn about something that's useful. Read some books. Do things that are considered productive. Hell, work a second job if you're single and you need to raise more money. Or, start building some kind of side hustle with using whatever few talents, well, in my case, few, whatever talents you do possess, right? If you're busy all the time, you won't get invited to things. If you're busy all the time, it'll be assumed that, oh, maybe that's not the person to invite to things or chat it up with because they're always so busy, right? So a good example, say you're at home, you're with your family or something. If they say, oh, there's this family gathering, right? I want you to go to. Now, most people, if they hear, or parents, if they hear, oh, I don't want to go, it's boring, or I don't want to go, it's not my thing, or, why do I have to go? Please don't make me go. I hate this. Any kind, regardless of how, like, honest you're being, most of that's going to be met with, like, a response of, like, you're going, or don't be rude, or you're going to get the type of conflict that you're trying to avoid, right? It's going to create that kind of conflict, which in turn creates more drain on you, which then you have to make up for with, extraordinary amounts of masking. And then by the time you're done with that day, you feel like complete dog shit. Okay, let's avoid that. This is what you do. You say, oh, I would like to go, but I have all this studying to do, and I really care about my grades. Oh, I would like to go, but I'm trying to make a little extra money, so I'm doing some side work, or I have a side job that I have to go to, because I have to pay for very important bills for my future. Now, you use responsibility in order to avoid these situations that you want to avoid. Now, I would love to say, just be honest. Tell them that you just don't understand the point of such a thing. That's not usually a really good answer, because it's going to turn into a clusterfuck, considering that most people don't metacognate enough to really understand what it is you're trying to say. You're not saying that their thing is shit. You're not saying that they are shit. You're not saying that the people at the event are shit. You're saying that you are not interested in said event. That doesn't go well. So, grind. Come up with a cool reason for why it is that you're so productive that, you're kind of being a little bit of a workaholic, right? Now, if you don't like lying, then don't lie. Be productive. If you don't mind lying, kind of be productive, and then half of that time just do whatever you want. For those that don't mind playing with the half-truths, especially when it comes to not feeling like dog shit for the rest of the day, I'm sure they'll survive without you. All right, so now tip number 3. Now that I talked a little bit about a few things you can do, this one's a little a little funny, a little tricky. Though some of you might say, "Well, I am that." So why would it be hard? Well, it depends on the level of masking you do and how trigger finger you are with it. The other tip I have is be boring. Be very, very boring and uninteresting to the people around you. Now, what I mean by that is low-level masking just to get by. Polite sincerity, of course. Just because we don't like to play social games does not mean that we don't respect civility. Many of us totally understand polite behavior. We don't see it as antithetical to ourselves. It's just a lot of the social dynamics in the games that we're not interested in. But in any case, be boring. If you're boring, people won't want to talk to you. At least boring to people that you don't want talking to you very much anyway, right? And, the sad part is that you might not even necessarily have an issue with them as a person. It's just what they talk about, right? And what they want to socialize and what they concern themselves with, that is more of the problem. But if you're essentially a little more honest in the sense that you don't partake in this, you don't show much interest in that or this, you don't talk about things that are all that interesting. So to them, right? They might be interesting to you. And in fact, it might be very interesting to other Zoids, right? But if you're the person that people don't like watching movies with because you like to talk too much about the movies, or you're the person that complains too much about this and that, right? They're not going to want to hang out with you. They're not going to want to talk to you. They're going to think, not hostility. Perhaps it won't even cause any kind of unwanted conflict. They're just going to think, that person's kind of boring. That's okay. That's good. Unfortunately, many schizoids out there, covert ones, they're charming. I had, and I'm not trying to humble brag, I know how to be this. I know how to be charming. I know how to be persuasive. I know how to make people think I'm an interesting person. Don't do it. Don't do it. Unless the person thinks you're interesting in a more sincere fashion, in the sense that you're just being you, at least whatever that may look like. If in fact you can tap into any of you, it depends on the situation. That's different. If you're, say, on the Zoid Void, if you're on the server and you're talking to other schizoids and they're like, oh, I like the things you talk about. They're interesting to me. Ah, yes, me too. Yes, this is cozy. I like this. This is comfortable. And people find you interesting in that manner. Yes, by all means. But if you're putting up a persona, if you're putting up this mask and say you're making jokes, you're trying to be charming, because a lot of the strategy sometimes is that if you're charming and people like you, they'll let you get away with more, or they'll leave you alone more. Doesn't really work. They're going to bother you more. They're going to expect more from you. They're going to want to apply more pressure on you socially, because there's going to be a certain level of expectation that you're creating. Don't create it. And if you want to undo your creation that you've already created, just do it slowly. Start pulling back a little bit every day. Pull back a little, right? And eventually you'll get to a point where, you'll go from, hey, that person was kind of fun, but recently, I don't know, they've just been kind of lackluster. That's fine. Be lackluster. Now, some of you may be saying, but I don't want to be boring. I want to learn how to make friends, but that I enjoy. How do I do that? Or, I'm tired of being lonely, so being alone doesn't cut it. Or, I already do some of these things, and they do work, but that's not what I'm going for. I'm looking for people I can, or a sense that I can connect to others. That's good. You can do that. But you're probably not going to be able to do that very well in most social situations with the regular folks you meet. That's probably not going to happen, and there's a very specific or why that doesn't happen, a reason. And that's because we're kind of different in many ways. And those differences don't really connect very well sometimes with what is understood to be a pretty conventional social framework. So that's part of what I'm trying to do. Trying to create more situations and scenarios in which you can find yourself in situations that are socially compatible to you. Now, if you hear these pieces of advice and you think, well, I don't need any of that. I get along just fine with the people I'm around. I just don't like to be around a lot of people. Or, I have a few select friends that I really enjoy in real life all the time. Even if it's just, I mean, I'm talking more like I like to go to parties with people that I like, and I have fun, and things like that. Okay, that's fine. This advice isn't really for you. This is more for the person that no matter what they do, no matter how much they mingle and attempt to socialize in a variety of settings, it's not clicking, and they just feel lonelier and emptier. And they're trying to avoid conflict so that they mask hours at a time, which is then exhausting and makes you feel even lonelier and emptier. That's what I'm talking about avoiding. Now, maybe some of this advice isn't the best advice. Maybe some of it's great. I don't know. This is just an example of some of the many things I had to do. If you disagree with some of the pieces of advice I have on this little recording, tell me. I'm curious. If you agree, cool. Use it, try it, and if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But a lot of these methods have worked for me. So those are my 3 tips. Is tip 1, be aware that you're masking. Be self-aware of when you're doing it and why you're doing it. And think about if those reasons are really valid. Right? Once you hone in on that, you do step 2 is when you start mitigating the amount of energy damage you take. Right? So you start thinking, when can I avoid masking? When do I really need to? And when can the risk-reward situation, benefit me and not benefit me? What are the situations in which I can take breaks realistically? What are things I can do in order to avoid situations in which I have to drain my energy on things that I don't really want to do so? Which is masking. Nobody wants to spend energy masking all day. Unless maybe you're an actor. I don't know. And then tip 3, be uninteresting to the people that you're not interested in speaking to. Because if you're uninteresting to them, then that's just fine, considering that you already find them uninteresting to be around. And that's not like a judgment. That's not like saying these people are uninteresting. They're just not interesting to you a lot of the time, just as you are not interesting to them. And a lot of that has to do with some, cognitive differences, different values, different priorities, different sets of thought pattern recognition. Kind of conflict a little bit. Doesn't really work out in the social world. And that's okay. It is what it is. But it's not a black pill, because I'm saying there are people out there that will find you interesting and you'll find them interesting in return. This is a possible thing. This is not an impossible dream. Okay? You just don't have much of a point of reference outside of what you've already experienced for the last few years, decades, or what have you. It's out there. It exists. And I'm trying my best to build something toward it. Maybe inspire others to build other things. If you like these videos, or you like my streams, or you like this channel, or the server, or anything else associated to this project and what I'm trying to do, please support me on Patreon. Donate there. PayPal, it's on there too. If you don't like any of that, crypto's fine. And if you don't like any of that, but you still want to do something, hit me up on the server. If you have a skill or a talent that you want to contribute. I'm not saying I can use it, but if I can, I will certainly tell you if you're interested in helping. Thank you very much for listening, and Zoid out.